I am delighted to welcome Aoife Spillane-Hinks, a theatre and opera director who works in Ireland and in the United States. Aoife is the artistic director of Then This Theatre. She holds a BA in folklore and mythology from Harvard University and an MA in drama and theatre studies from NUI Galway, and trained as a director on the Rough Magic Seeds programme. She also works as a teacher and as a coach. Hello, Aoife. How are you doing on this lovely
Hello.
sunny day?
I'm pretty good. Thank you.
Good. How has this period of time been for you? This Corona moment?
Um, to be honest, it's been okay for me.
Mm,
I've found it a really interesting time.
yeah.
I've found it quite productive in
Mhm.
different ways.
What stuff have you been doing?
And oh, yeah, so kind of a number of different things. It feels like there have been several different phases to this period of
Yeah.
time ever since mid-March, when everything kind of shut down. And, you know, it's like, so sometimes I
Mhm.
think back to like the phase when my husband and I were watching 90s movies every night. And, the
Mm.
phase when I was walking around my garden in circles for exercise and loving it, but looking insane to the neighbors. Or so there have been different phases for sort of living and for working.
Mm.
So at the start of it, um, I just decided to start doing something, which was to every weekday at least read a play every day. And
Great.
part of that was just that it was something that I'd been meaning to do for a while. As part of an over the last year or so, I've really felt a need to reconnect to the original love that I had for theater. I've felt like
Mm.
it's really gotten splintered in the midst of being concerned about external validation and about all the kind of important but potentially stressful elements of having a career in theater.
Making a living, or that? Yeah.
Exactly, and tying your self-worth and identity in with external factors that are beyond your control. So I'd actually been thinking a lot about how when I was like 12, 13, I fell in love with reading plays. So I kept saying, I really want to just start doing this again. So when the lockdown happened and all the meetings and impending rehearsals or travel or
Mm.
teaching that was coming up was canceled. I just went, right, well, I have time. I'll just read a play every day. And that
Yeah.
was at first just it was an immediate thing that I could start doing straight away. But I found actually that it was incredibly good for my mental health because it allowed me to feel like I was still going to the gym.
You'd nourished that part of,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely,
Hmm.
and I was thinking through even, some of the plays that I was reading were so absorbing and the descriptions of the setting were so rich that I would feel like I was experiencing this world. And it was, I had the luxury of there was no way that I was going to be producing any of these plays soon. So that kind of sense that I've gotten as an adult reading plays of, well, I mean, I can't do a play with 12 characters and I can't cast this part and this part, so I can't connect with reading this play. That terrible thing that can
Yeah.
start happening. I was just going, well, none of us are going to be doing any plays for a while. So let me just read this play and love it. But
Mm.
also, I felt that work of imagining how people would move across the stage, what the kind of physical dynamics between the people would be, just because I'm reading it through and those things are coming to life. So I felt like I had this connection with my work, even as I wasn't able to be doing the active work. Um, so
Yeah.
that was a really remarkable phase of it. That phase has passed. That was like 3 phases ago. But I think so that was about a month and a half that lasted, and then something else happened. I can't even remember exactly what incited that routine from moving into something else. But I've actually found that the coaching work has become there's been a lot of it, and it's been incredibly diverse. I've
Yeah.
found that a lot of my thoughts about creation, a lot of my thoughts about collaboration, about
Mm.
personal aesthetic and the development of the relationship between the self and one's work and one's intuition, that thinking
Mhm.
a lot about that myself, and thinking a lot about that as someone who's trying to facilitate that for other people, I've felt an incredible amount of growth in that area over the course of this time, when both I'm able to engage with so many people who are at a loose end, who have
Yeah.
time to be working on a script that they've been meaning to develop, or they want to just work on a monologue just because. Um, and also because there's been so much time at home, that I've also had a lot of time to process that, to think about that. So there's been an active component, and there's been a real reflective component, which is so often not possible, you know.
Yeah, how wonderful. And very well put. It was amazing to hear you talk about all of that. Um,
Oh,
so we're going to
thanks.
go more in depth about the coaching that you mentioned there later in the interview, but I'm going to travel
Yeah.
back in time for a second. And what motivated your initial move from New Haven to Dublin?
Yeah, so I basically moved here straight out of college. I
Mm,
had graduated from undergrad up in Boston in June of 2006, and during that year, that final year of college, I kind of knew that I wanted to move to Europe, at least for a year, at least to
mm,
do some form of study. I didn't, I thought about, would that be going to France? Would that be going to Italy? I don't speak Italian, but thinking about the styles of theater that I was interested in and stuff like that, I was thinking,
yeah.
I had gone to Ireland a lot as a kid. I've got family here, and my mother has been writing about Irish politics, culture, and politics for my whole life. So she would have work trips over here, and we'd also end up spending time simply traveling around, mainly completely outside of Dublin, the
Yeah.
countryside up to the north, down west, down south. And but I started doing research in Ireland in the couple of summers before I graduated, because I did
Mhm.
this degree in folklore and mythology, which focused on um, Irish folk material and the way in which people use that in a theatrical form. And I focused especially on John Millington Synge. So I was doing research in the archives in Trinity, and I was on Inishmaan, where he spent so much time,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
went to Irish college to study Irish, and I just got a sense that it was a much better place in 2006 to be a young artist starting out than it was to be in the States.
Hmm.
So I don't think I expected to be here 14 years later, but
Wow.
you know, it and it's funny because obviously right now we look so much at the precarity of artists' lives here, and that's absolutely
Hmm.
true. Um, but and I think 13, 12, 10 years ago, around the time that I was in a much less stable place and a much earlier phase in my whole life in different ways, I think things were different for people who needed the dole, who needed rent assistance. It
Yeah.
was much more accessible and decent. Um, And it was certainly a place where I was able to focus more on making art and figuring
Hmm.
myself out as an artist. It was certainly a place where I could do that with much more sustainability than if I tried
Yeah.
to do that in New York City or LA or Chicago or
Mm.
any number of spots in
Well,
the US.
maybe my maths is off, which often happens, but 14 years ago, does that mean you were here pre Celtic Tiger or post? Did you see that crash happen and the industry shift then, or did you arrive in the
Yes.
aftermath of that?
I got here just before everything exploded,
Yeah, that's
which
where
was an
I thought,
interesting. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I had a couple of years and for instance, when I was in Rough Magic Seeds,
Hmm.
we were funded by AIB. So we had this bank um, funding the program. So it wasn't that we were, treated like VIPs, but there were a lot of resources that were given
Sensible.
to the program in a way, yeah, that was representative of a kind of waning era at that stage. And I
Yeah.
remember, I think it was in 2010 that the first real massacre happened, where
Mm,
I remember the list on Facebook being posted of all of these annually funded companies that were suddenly slashed in their funding or removed entirely from annual funding.
yeah.
And it was so strange to have moved here at a time, and I had, I would have grown up having a sense of Irish theatre and the strength of it.
Mm,
And, there would have been a lot of work, Brian Friel's work, Druid's work, stuff coming over to New York that I would have seen. And a sense of all these companies and the strength and the kind of solidity of their identities. And then moving over here, '06, '07, watching theatre companies work where I'm like, these are just companies that are set in
yeah.
stone that will just continue to grow. And to see a
Mhm,
number of companies, so many of them,
yeah.
out from under them, really changed what one expected from the trajectory of a career or the trajectory of a company going forward.
Yeah. Wow. So directors are often expected to be mediators, coaches, counselors, and to wear so many hats in the rehearsal room and in the process. How do you navigate those blurred lines with your cast and company? And does it differ? Is it very different in that sense, working with professionals versus working with students training, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm learning it every day,
Mm,
and making mistakes, and I probably won't ever be perfect. And I think that's probably all of us in these collaborative professions,
all
you know.
human beings with all our flaws.
Exactly. I'm sure parents have that feeling. I'm sure, in every relationship. But it's absolutely something that is a daily job. And certainly when you're actively in the rehearsal room day to day, a really important part of your job. I can remember one time a good few years ago, I was over in Pittsburgh directing a play, and we had not a lot of time to do it. It's a huge play, 10 actors, ensemble piece. And I remember
Mm,
noticing one of the actors just wasn't on his game. It was just something was up. And I remember, without anyone noticing, kind of taking a break and pulling him aside and saying, what's the story? But it was
yeah,
clear that the best way for him to be able to do his best work as soon as possible was to be able to take that walk, right? And I look
mm,
back and I'm really proud of that moment. And I felt in that moment, I not only gave him a sense that he could release the pressure valve in that moment, but also he knew that he was safe with me. I knew he wasn't
mm,
going to take the piss. But on the other hand, I can think back on, like, examples in the last year or so when I became too receptive to something
yeah,
that an actor needed or what they were, something they were struggling with. And I allowed their preoccupations with that to kind of unravel the plan that I had for how we were going to work. And
hmm,
things like, even little things like the struggles that actors can have with learning their lines sometimes, and
yeah,
exactly how to navigate between. I'm sure it's like parenting. On the one hand, you go, I'm here for you. I can support you. What do you need from me? And on the other hand, finding a way to say, this is also not work that we do in the room together. I'm here
yes,
for you. We can talk it through, but I got to have you do this outside, because what I need to
hmm,
do here is not going to get done if I'm helping you drill your lines too much. And I think that part of it as well
yeah,
for directors is, we can talk a lot about it being, I don't think it's necessarily taken advantage of, but, oh, we're too giving or too receptive. But I think sometimes as well, it's a balance about your ego as well. Of, am
hmm,
I viewing myself as the person who I can save everyone from everything. My
yeah,
capacity as a leader, is such that I will help you crack the lines, and I'll direct this
hmm,
play, and I'll make you like me, and I won't take a lunch break because this person can only come in and talk about the design during all these things. And then when you have a meltdown, everyone's going, what's happening? And in a
Mm-hmm.
way you go, well, yeah, but you asked for this of me. But of course, really, your job is to be able to tell someone, this is what I can do for you, and this is what I can't do for you. And that's a gift rather than being miserly, you know?
Yes, it's interesting because I mean, I've worked with directors that are, you know, incredibly engaged and nurturing in terms of the state of minds and well-being of their cast, and then I've worked with other directors that are polar opposite, kind of hardline. No, you leave everything at the door, and I don't want to
Yeah,
know. And if you show it to me, you're letting me down. And
yeah,
yeah, it's interesting to think about what the expectation of the director is. Maybe it's a personal thing, but um,
yeah.
what do you think should be expected of a director? Do you think there's a balance to be struck, or do you think it really is person by person?
Well, I think that there are a couple of different aspects of it. On the one hand, of course, like all artists, um, like all practitioners of anything, different directors are going to have different approaches. And
Mm,
in the same way as, you know, you might visit different doctors and they have different personal styles, but you can still same sense of effectiveness and professionalism and everything else. I think the same thing can happen with directors. Someone might not be very forthcoming, and
yeah.
maybe, maybe as a director they're not an incredibly emotional person, and they're not going to
Mm-hmm.
necessarily be someone who's going to be able to engage with you about emotions that are coming up for you. But that person can still create a space in which there's a way to deal with that. If it's about
Mm-hmm.
that there's someone else to have a conversation with, or that that person takes a moment or whatever. Um, I think the big thing to keep in mind is, regardless of your approach, whether you're a taskmaster, whether you're more about facilitation and there being a nurturing or collaborative element, there's a baseline duty of care that has to do with not breaking people's spirits, um, allowing people to feel that they can fail and be wrong, and look stupid and mess up, as long
Mm.
as everyone is working in good faith, as long as everyone is
Yeah.
coming to the room prepared, and if we can
Mm-hmm.
all know that as a baseline, then if someone goes up on their lines, or if someone isn't cracking something, or someone is doing X, Y, or Z that isn't the ideal form of what we'd like to see on stage when this all opens, well, we got to work within the realm of, to tell that person simply that they're screwing up is probably not going to get us closer.
Yeah.
But if that person can be made to feel like, listen, today's clearly not your day, but what we can continue to do is work and to listen to this piece, and
Mm-hmm.
and you have integrity and dignity within this process, whether or not you're being brilliant today. Bottom line is, do no harm.
Yeah. As long as everyone's showing up physically, mentally, in preparation terms to the best of their ability of that given day. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
In your opinion, have you noticed a difference between the way that the Irish theatre sector handles well-being and mental health within the industry compared with the sector in the States?
In a general way, whether I necessarily have a deep enough knowledge of how it's being treated in the
Mm,
States to really comment on that,
yeah.
what I will say is, on a systemic level, again,
Mm-hmm.
while there are some major issues in terms of the supports for artists in this country, the lack of support is even more egregious in the States. One of the primary issues for their mental health is simply the lack of social support on a really basic level, in a way that even with our not perfect system, um, there's a baseline of support that a lot of people have been able to obtain during COVID, say, than over in the
Yeah.
States. Um, I do think that so that's one systemic thing. Another systemic thing is the fact that the that equity, that the actors union is so strong in the States, I think that does
Mm,
give people a sense of being able to work, if there are systemic issues in American theater, um, while there are a variety of,
yeah,
of elements of that,
yeah.
there's a way to address it within a system that I think
Mm,
sometimes here, although there have been amazing threads that have emerged during COVID of activism
yeah,
and you know of advocacy within Ireland. I think sometimes people can view equity as a place through which they can affect change and have these bigger um, um, sectoral conversations.
yeah, yeah.
Which
Very
I
good
think
point.
can have a good impact on mental health.
Are you still in touch with many American colleagues that are in the States, working in the States, that maybe you worked with previously or have maintained connection with over these 14 years that you've lived here?
Yeah, yeah.
Are there any kind of major differences of perspective or concern that you've noticed maybe in conversation with them or
Again, and I always run the risk of sounding like a Pollyanna when I talk about this. I know things over here aren't perfect. In a variety of ways. And I know that the circumstances for artists have degraded over the last decade.
Mhm.
Nevertheless, there are certain things in place here that allow artists to feel more a part of society in a way that is just uh, when when I take a taxi over here, most of the time the taxi driver who I'm riding with, when I say that I work in theater, most of the time that person has something to say about sometime that they've gone to the theater, whether it was a
Yeah.
long time ago or recently or whatever else. Those sorts of taking for granted of the arts in a relatively everyday kind of way, and not taking for
Mhm.
granted in a negative way, but just taking for granted that this is part of the stuff that we talk about. I think that
Yeah.
informs some of the social safety nets that, again, I know are not perfect, that are
Mhm.
deeply frustrating. But it means on a basic level that I think artistic lives feel more sustainable and feel more legitimate over here than a place where arts often feels like a great afterthought. And so
Mm,
that's borne out financially, the idea of,
yeah.
you know, even certain kinds of initiatives that we can take advantage of in terms of bursaries or residencies within venues or within theater companies. Um, Again, I can sound like such a Pollyanna and say, I'm not saying everything's perfect, but there are opportunities that we get here that American artists, when I tell them about it, they're just like, that is just hard for me to imagine thinking of as a normal part of my landscape, and I think that
Mm,
that fundamental sense that arts, even, I know we look at Germany, we go, God, look at Germany, it's so great over there, look at all the okay, that's absolutely, and we should want more. But
yeah.
when we look westward, my friends are going, the
Mm,
idea that people would consider this to be a job, a thing that
mhm.
people think about, that people care about on a regular basis, it
Yeah.
has a huge impact from the floor to the ceiling of experience as an artist.
Yeah. No, it's a really good point. And on the road to change, and there's all the wonderful work that the NCFA are doing and everything, we should remember to take a moment to appreciate where on that journey we are and how we
Yes.
are fortunate in many ways as we build towards more improvements and continue striving for better. But we are very
Yeah.
fortunate in so many ways. Yeah.
Well, and I will say that, I believe sometimes you have to go burn it all down, but so
Mm,
often it's so important to say, what have we got and what can we build
yeah.
on? And there is so much we have to build on here.
So much. Yeah. Yeah. So much we have, and so much that has been, generations of incredible culture. You were talking about sing, and it's still there in the people in the country, and yeah, we should really, really celebrate that as we strive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I said earlier that we would come back to the wonderful coaching services that you've been offering and working on. Now is that moment. So, in response to the COVID crisis, you have been offering these coaching services as pay what you can. So, could you talk a bit about what services you provide in these sessions and what that experience has been like? Who, not well, not who, that would be confidentially inappropriate for you to talk about specific people, but what kind of thing you've been doing with people.
Yeah, so basically, in terms of the thinking behind the pay what you can, I've been coaching for years, but this period of time when people's financial lives suddenly became so unpredictable and so unknown going
Mm,
into the future, you know, again, it felt like a good time to be engaging with people. It felt like also a good time to really lower the threshold for who could, or lower the bar for who would be able to access something like that. So that I was
mm,
maximizing my contacts with people who are looking to positively develop, and people could access that in a way that was not too strenuous on their finances. So basically, I've been working in three strands pretty much. The first strand is performance coaching, which is for both actors and non actors. I work
mhm,
with actors on, as I said earlier, just working on a monologue for the heck of it, working on prep for auditions as TV and film auditions come back, preparing to do script work for a script that they'll actually be in rehearsal for, very much not directing them, but showing them the elements of the script that they could pick up and use with the director. And
mhm,
then also working with non actors on public speaking skills for things like a best man speech or for a presentation at work or for just focusing oneself in an interview. And then the second strand is project development. So a lot of that is with writers, whether that's playwrights, screenwriters. I worked recently with someone who's writing a children's book who had a narrative knot that they were trying to untangle. So we worked our way
yeah.
through that and found a solution to that. And then finally, the third strand is creative career coaching, which can really take on the form that the individual needs, but is largely about assessing where people are in their career, in their lives, and in a non-directive way for me, listening to where their instincts and their desires are telling them they want to go next.
Mhm. And so, with that creative career coaching, it's specifically for people with careers within the arts, is it?
Yeah,
Or is
so
it?
I mean the way that I've thought about it is that the term creative career coaching can kind of mean careers in the creative industries, but it can also mean a creative approach
Mhm.
to coaching. So if somebody approached me
Yeah.
who was not in the creative sphere, I'd be more than happy to speak with them, to talk through things with them. But
Mm,
obviously, I'd have a lot less uh, personal experience with just the terrain. So
yeah.
yeah, all the
Yeah.
conversations up to now, all the sessions I've had have been with people in the creative industries.
Hmm. And obviously, without breaking anyone's
Mm.
confidentiality, but have there been any kind of main themes or concerns that have cropped up within a similar vein within those creative career coaching sessions?
Well, it's interesting because actually, I think even beyond those particular sessions, across all three of the different strands, one of the most important jobs that I have is to empower people, is to give people permission to listen to their gut. So much
Mm,
of the time in each of those three strands, whether you're a performer interpreting text or doing some other kind of performance, whether you're a writer or some kind of maker making something, or whether you're thinking about your career, your professional life, people are so often bound up in the expectations of others, of the requirements of the of the opinions of others in all three of those areas. And of course, we've got to take that into consideration. There's all sorts of nuts and bolts stuff that we've got to be aware of when we're thinking about any of those
Hmm.
three. But at the same time, there's an essential listening that you have to learn to be able to do with yourself in all three of those
Hmm.
strands. That if we think about the career coaching in particular, you've got to think about the realities of X, Y, and Z about whatever the field is that you're working in, and yada, yada, yada. But at the same time, you've also got to know, I'm just thinking about some of the conversations that I've had. Number one, people will often say, say someone might say, I feel that I really need to go into um, design, theater design, let's
Mm.
say. That feels like the right place for me to go, and people seem to really like my designs and everything else. But I find actually, as I'm writing down my notes, that they keep talking about how much they love directing. And sometimes it's the simple act of my just saying, I just want to point out that you've talked several times about these different instances of being really happy as you directed. And
Yeah.
I just want to say that back to you. And so a lot of it isn't necessarily, obviously, it's not about my opinion what they should do, um, but it's about letting them hear themselves. Because the fact is, right, when we're in the field, this field, when we're in these careers that are so uncertain, that really any
Yeah.
of the areas that you choose are going to be uncertain and precarious, you might as
Yeah.
well develop a real authentic conversation with yourself about exactly what life within this field is going to matter most to you and is going to set your fire alight the most that you can.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow. That's sent off all chain of thoughts in my mind. Um, yeah, how interesting. Um, it's kind of so simple on one level, but it's something that must be so beneficial for people to just be made aware of those things. Yeah. Wow. And have you noticed that those conversations, sorry, go on with what you were going to say. I feel like you were going to say something.
I was going to say something very silly, which is so much happens, so much transformational stuff happens when someone receives and care and specific responses. And this is my silly example. If you think about Queer Eye, Queer
Mm,
Eye is so astonishing because a person has 5 people come in and focus on what they need. And it's not
yes.
about transforming your life into a millionaire's life with everything. It's not about that. It's about, what is your life about? And let me hear you talk about that. And when
Mm-hmm.
you look at those people in Queer Eye, it's not just about the walls and their clothes and whatever else. It's the transformation of the sense of self when you
Yeah.
receive such high quality attention from another person.
Yeah.
you know
Bringing everything in alignment somehow, not actually fundamentally
yeah.
changing anything, but actually just looking at, yeah, that balance of inner and outer life. Have these conversations changed during this period, or have people used this opportunity to have the conversations that they would have wanted to have and maybe not had the time to, or have some of the conversations been motivated by the pandemic? Did I articulate that right?
You really did. That's beautiful. And I think you've taken us in that question to the real thing that I find going on, which
Mm,
obviously there is distress, there is concern, there is uncertainty amongst all of us in this field, amongst all of us in the world. But what I find in my sessions is, more often than
mm.
not, people are there going, if not now, when? They're
Yes.
going, I'm not
Mm,
doing anything else. So why don't I sort myself out in this way? Or why don't I
mm,
think more about this? Or why don't I work on this screenplay or this play or this project of whatever kind? Because I'm not going out as much. I'm not having all these different things happen, and I think and really hard to talk about the opportunities of the pandemic when the gaps between different kinds of privilege and different kinds of comfort and
Yeah.
safety are so wide, right? So to say, oh, it's amazing, what a great opportunity, of course, excludes the experience of not only people in other countries or in other communities, but other people who we know who have different situations than we do. Totally. But within that history of certain opportunities, of certain kinds of space or quiet or lack of pressure, a slowed
Mm.
down tempo to your life,
Yeah.
that is where I am seeing people engage with this work and really take the
Hmm.
opportunity to say, um, God, who was I talking to? And I wish I could. Well, somebody was saying something. I'm so sorry to whoever this person was talking to me about the importance of not only active work, but about reflection and
Mm.
about receiving.
Yes,
And I
things
think
coming,
again,
appreciate noticing the things coming to you, not just
yes,
always. Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, you know. And when
Mm.
people are just feeling, um, to use an illness proverb in the midst of a pandemic feels quite bad form. But what keeps coming to mind is there's a proverb that says, "If your illness has no cure, why worry?" And I think there's an
Mm.
element where people are saying, "Well, everything's uncertain. I'm stuck here. I'm not in this rehearsal for this show that was meant to be at this time. I'm not traveling here. I'm not." But what if I just say, okay, what can I do right now if that isn't happening?
Yeah.
You know,
Hmm.
and how can I
Because loss is
grow?
there. If we focus on
Yeah,
them, focusing on those losses, putting our energy there isn't going to get them back. So
yeah,
focusing on the opportunities isn't denying those losses, which of course everyone globally has suffered some losses. But
yeah,
let's not feed that machine. Let's feed the opportunities and the positivity while we do what we can in this time. Mm.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
The arts sector is expected to be adaptable, even in the best of times. So we're obviously all adapting right now, but we are constantly within our careers as artists. So, with issues like sustainability of a career in the arts, which we've kind of touched on already, and a very present kind of fear of burnout within this industry, which was kind of already in people's minds before this crisis. Do you have any advice or thoughts for artists that are trying to plan for the future, plan post pandemic, when things go back to normal, that may be afraid of jumping in too quick and burning out, and or not being able to cope with the pace that we had been also used to keeping up before? Do you have any thoughts on that kind of area?
yeah. So I think there are a couple of things. You know, one of them is that I think the eternal job of anybody in a precarious life is, as much as they're able to, on a really basic level, figure out how to look after your health. And that's both
Hmm.
physical and mental.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, just on a basic, and it's something you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. But as much as you can, figuring out how to look after yourself, mind and body, absolutely crucial, day to day for the rest
Hmm.
of your life. I think also, and so a lot of the other stuff that I'll say connects back in with one or both of those. Um, I found myself saying to a couple of friends and about myself over this period of time is, you got to know what is in your like break in emergency box,
Yeah.
the things
Very
that you've got to
impulsive.
pull
Yeah,
out.
yeah, yeah.
Like what are the things that when you are spinning and the sitting down and thinking through it or taking a walk or having an ice cream or whatever is not cutting it, what
Mm.
is the cavalry that you call in to save you, and that's for different people, that's different things. So I think first of all it's really important to know what gets you out of the hole, and and to develop a sense of your own self, to know when you need to call in the cavalry. That's just really important
Yeah,
now and always.
yeah. You can't necessarily come up with one. So that's actually such a smart thing to have it there when you're not capable of figuring it out for yourself. A reflex, a go through the motions kind of until it does feel better. Yes,
Absolutely,
sorry, that
absolutely.
was very, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's great, and it's something, I find uh, every year that I live, I get a better and
Mm,
better sense of that. I get a better sense of going, I'm not in a great place right now. I'm going to call up that emergency team. So it's an ongoing
yeah.
process. Also, I think it's incredibly important to remember that a couple of things. Like, let's strip some sort of normative ideas about a couple of things away. Number one, there is no one shape, timeline, or um, exact description of an artistic career.
Hmm.
So comparing yourself to anybody else is a fool's errand. And I know we say that and then we all do it and we all destroy ourselves with it. But
Hmm.
it's also to just say your life never simply contains the validation or rejection or anything else of the present moment. Your life always contains so much more than however your career is doing right now. So it's incredibly important to nurture whatever the other elements of your life are that are important to sustain you.
Hmm.
If that is personal relationships, whether that's friend relationships, whether that's a romantic partnership, whatever the configuration for you, and it's not the same
Hmm.
for everybody, whatever the configuration is that you need, to know that those investments are as valuable as the investments you make in your career. That again connects in with just knowing what kind of food you like to eat, what kind of food
Yeah.
helps you keep going, what kind of food nourishes and energizes you, but also just knowing, like, what other things are you into. I mean, and it
Mm,
doesn't have to be deep. Part of it
yeah.
is like, what do you need to turn on when you need to turn off? Do you like The Real
Hmm.
Housewives or RuPaul or Love Island? I mean, I know I do.
Amen.
And
But yeah,
you know I rub
yeah.
oil into my cuticles and read gossip magazines every night. And I need that
Mm,
to exist in a place where I am just a fluffhead and all I worry
hmm.
about is whether my cuticles are moisturized. So all those silly or not silly things. Do you care about music? Um,
Yeah.
how can you enter into the world in different ways, right? So, like, I'm a
Hmm.
director, but and I know how to do this. I teach acting, I teach these things, but I was just in a playwriting course, which is something I'm not amazing at. And I'm in a singing course right now, which is something that I'm not professional at. But I'm entering into someone else's space, entering into my own mind in a different way. So finding other
Expand.
facets of your lived experience. Exactly. You
Mm,
know, um, and also knowing that your professional life, if it's hyphenate, if you're a director and a this and a that, or if you're a theater maker and a chef and a lawyer, if you are a
hmm.
taxi driver and a painter, first of all, none of these things are any less or greater than any of the others. The other thing is, and this is the crucial thing, is that they all feed one another if you approach them in a manner where you see them as part of one life's work. And
Hmm.
that the teaching is it's not that it's the same as the directing, it's not the exact same skill set. It's not the same exact energies or anything else. But all of it feeds into the principles by which I hope to live my life.
Yeah.
And everything that a person does can be part of one mission, even if it's not
Hmm.
entirely along the same career path as anyone else would envision, you know? And I think if you have your
Yes.
own
Yeah.
sense of agency and dignity within the choices that you make and the things that you care about and that matter to you, there's a far higher chance that you'll find resilience rather than someone who
Mm,
feels consistently in thrall to the ideas and expectations and structures and values of others.
yeah. Living their life by those. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Wow. Um, the last question I'm going to ask you is about the Axis Ballymun, who have just announced an exciting new artistic experiment, the Axis Pop-Up Literary Department. So how did this come about and how can we get involved?
So, in terms of getting involved, and in terms of the details of the project, that's going to, first of all, it is an experiment. So, it's going to be developing over the course of its lifetime, which is also
Mm-hmm.
the length of the lifetime will be discovered along with everything else. So we'll be giving more details in terms of how people can get involved and how people can follow what we're up to very soon as the weeks go along. But really, it came out of I guess I am an associate artist with Axis this year. I live in Whitehall
Mm-hmm.
in Dublin 9, which is about a 10-minute bike ride to Axis. And I've loved Axis since the first time that I went there in 2007, way before I lived close by.
Wow.
And so, associate artist, obviously, things are so different now from how they were supposed to be this year. So,
Mhm. Are you oh my words, associate artist for this year only? Or will it go on
I
beyond?
I actually don't know. I actually I can't even remember at this stage if there was. I think we were very much thinking about what would be happening this year, so that's where I was
Yes.
focused on. Um,
Hmm.
but one of the big things as the pandemic has been happening and the arts venues have been closed and everything else, obviously we've very rightfully been focusing on the precarity of the lives of independent artists. And incredibly
Hmm.
important that we do that. But I have been thinking about, you know, what can we as citizens, as well as artists, what can we do to help our industry and to help our buildings, our venues, come back to life as well? And I had gotten in contact with Mark about that. In general, just saying, listen, this is my local art center. I'd be more than happy to be a part of whatever needs to happen. And he kind of came back and was like, it's our job to be there for you. Just like, yes, you're on a list. If we need you, we'll call. But no, like it's about, what do you need as an artist? Let's have a conversation about how we can continue to support you as an associate artist through this different time than we had expected. So, part of it is, and again, it kind of goes back to not just kind of being in the whirlwind of outside expectations or whatever else. Before the
Hmm.
meeting, I just sat down for a couple hours and just kind of took some notes, talked out loud to myself, and figured out what is it that I do need right now? What do I care about? And I realized that with so much of this work with coaching and with a lot of it being working with different kinds of writers and makers, which has just been so wonderful. And it's just so rewarding when you see people visibly helped by the end of a session and feeling more
Yeah.
full of more agency and power and everything else. And so I was thinking, and I just said to him when we had our Zoom conversation, I said, "Can I tell you a dream?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." And I said, "I would love to start a literary department here." And he said, "Okay." And as anyone who knows Mark O'Brien will know, he's the kind of person who, when you give him an idea, he starts to grow it, he bounces it, he just develops it and deepens it. So he said to me, "Okay, let's do a pop-up literary department. It's not necessarily forever. We're looking at
Mm.
this uncertain time. Access has brought on, through the bursary and other associate supports, they've brought on a number of writers who are receiving either in-kind support like space and mentorship, and or
Yeah.
also some bursary money to support the writing. So basically, one of the big things we're looking at is how can I be a part of the process of being kind of a call in as a collaborator to have conversations with people, to facilitate the work, to help them develop that process for themselves. So be there as part of that process, as part of that support system, but also just to do things like I have this dream. And it goes back to my having fallen in love with reading scripts when I was 12 years old, 13 years old. I have this dream of, I said to him, I'd love to set up like a lending library or some little drama bookshop in some part of the lobby. just so whether it's paying money or trading books or whatever, just so if someone's just hanging around there, as they do in Axis, because Axis has cultivated that atmosphere of
Mm,
accessibility, that people in the community are welcome. This is their space. That you might be sitting there having a coffee or waiting for your mom to get off work and she's around the corner, and just pick up a book. So
yeah.
who knows if that's going to be practicable with all the social distancing and everything else, but we've
Mhm.
talked about, let's drop a plan for that. Let's drop a plan for potentially having reading groups where we're reading plays, whether that's online or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
So, a lot of this will be about truly going back to that idea of it being an experiment, that you have to be guided by your lab results to know how you go
Mhm.
forward. Um, but it's really exciting. The idea of being able to work with Access, to be able to spend a couple of days a week in that building, and
Yeah.
working with a wide variety of people making work and at different points of their lives and points of development as writers and makers. It's really exciting.
Yeah, it sounds really exciting. And what a nice note to end on, looking forward into a project that is just about to be taking form. Um, so I'm
Yeah.
sure everyone will watch the space for that. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this conversation. Um, I've loved chatting to you so much, and thank you so much for
Likewise.
joining us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.